And the act of moving onward means we pass these signposts. One of them was first leaving Earth. The next one is hanging out on the moon. What's next? The planets. Onward to the edge. We're moving onward to the edge. Here we are together. This fragile little world. This fragile little world. Onward to the edge. We're moving onward to the edge. Here we are together. This fragile little
Hello
world.
and welcome to another episode of Voices from L5. Today I have an old guest and an old friend, Tom Marotta, here, and we're going to talk a little bit about space settlement. Weird, right? Hey Tom, how you doing?
Very good, Liam. It's great to be back. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. It's nice to have you back on. I mean, you were one of the first guests, and you're kind of an important part of the whole Voices from L5 structure, being our webmaster and all.
It's my pleasure.
So today we thought it would be good to actually talk a little bit about the very basics of space settlement. I mean, we've had a lot of incredible guests on. We've talked about some outstanding subjects. We've talked about, politics. We talked about the legal system. We talked a little bit about everything, I think. Society, art, everything. It's been a really good ride so far. But we were talking a little bit ago, and I realized that we haven't actually sat down and defined space settlement or talked about all the very basic elements of it.
Right.
So, why don't you tell them what we're going to do today, Tom?
Well, we're going to switch it up, and I am going to interview you. I'm going to allow you to do what you do best and break it down to the most basic components. Well, I just think we should just get started. I'll just ask you some questions, and you can answer.
All right, sounds great.
Awesome. So the first thing, I'm going to pretend that I'm a person who is just listening to this podcast for the first time, isn't really a space person. I'm using air quotes there. And so I'm going to ask basic questions just to get the absolute simplest idea. So to start out, what in your mind is the broadest possible definition of space settlement? What does it mean to settle space?
Well, I mean, you get a lot of different answers to that question. Personally, mine is that you have a self-sustaining living in space. That's really all it boils down to. I think technically the dictionary definition of settlement is when you are able to grow crops in a place. I learned that from The Martian last week. But it breaks down to, you are able to sustain yourself and the society that you exist within. Now, a lot of people have different definitions of settlement. Some people believe that settlement begins when you have the first-born person native in that area. Some people think that settlement begins when, if we sent a rocket up there with 1,000 people and they just started milling around on the rocket, that counts. I mean, it all depends on who you ask. Like I say, my personal definition falls in the Martian's definition. I think as soon as you start growing food and you're able to live there without, say, Earth support, you've settled space.
So okay, there's a space station in space, people can grow their own food, and then there's a terrible apocalypse and the whole Earth, everybody on Earth dies. So that is a space settlement in your mind up there.
Sure.
It can survive completely independent of Earth.
Right, exactly.
Right. I mean, with the understanding that it can trade and whatever, but if the Earth goes away, those people will still be able to propagate and continue and live.
Exactly, that's precisely it.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to throw a devil's advocate question at you. What if, on the space station, I just read that they're growing lettuce, they're growing food on the space station. Mm-hmm. But is the space station a space settlement?
Probably not yet.
Why not?
Because I don't think that you can subsist off of lettuce just yet. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's interesting in a social and cultural way, in a way that I don't think has been talked about massively just yet. But growing food in space is definitely one huge step towards settlement. But I don't necessarily think that the space station, the ISS, counts right now, just because, like I say, you're not living off of the quantities of food that they've been growing up there. The space station's been growing food pretty much since it's been built. Or not food, but life in some way. You've had plants and, experiments with seeds and that sort of thing pretty much for a decade now.
Right.
But I wouldn't say it's a settlement until, you're able to survive off the food that you're growing.
Cool. Okay. Well, you mentioned the Martian, and I mentioned the space station. So, there are different types of space settlement, right? Like there's that group that wants to send people to Mars one way, and, Elon Musk, the Tesla guy, is building rockets to go to Mars and colonize Mars. Like, what about the moon? What about Mars? Is that space settlement?
Yeah. I mean, okay, so you have a variety of different kinds of space settlement. Space settlement, as in a very broad way, refers to any settlement that isn't as part of Earth, okay? I mean, it's a very broad term. What you really have when you break it down is 2 or 3 different kinds of settlements. And this is using, some broad definitions here. But first of all, you got what Al Globus and a couple other folks refer to as freestanding, which is to say a settlement that is a large station in space somewhere, either orbiting a planet or at an L5 point or something like that, or orbiting a moon even. That still counts. Just a space station that's capable of keeping the space out, keeping people inside it alive, and being a self-sustaining ecosystem.
Like Halo, or like an enormous space station, or like maybe this is a bad example, but something like the Death Star, like an enormous man-made structure.
Sure. Or more recently, Elysium is a good example.
Right, but not evil, not necessarily evil.
You don't have to be evil to settle space, but apparently it helps.
Okay, all right. So those are free space settlements. But what about Mars? I want to go to Mars.
You can go to Mars. A Mars settlement definitely counts as a space settlement as far as that's concerned. We call that planetary settlement, or at least I do. I'm not sure if there's a better term for it out there because in my definition, planetary settlement also covers moons and lunar settlements and what have you. Both of these different methods have unique issues and benefits. I'm a big advocate for freestanding space settlements as well as I know you are. In that with freestanding you don't have to worry about gravity, you're in full control of your ecosystem, you don't got to worry about pollution and all sorts of problems that are affecting us on Earth, as well as you get access to the asteroids and all the other things that space gives you, like solar power and what have you. Whereas on a planet, you got all the drawbacks of being on Earth, really. You've got the gravity to deal with. You've got, various different horrible radiation that's harder to shield yourself from. You've got weird weather that you're dealing with, and
earthquakes,
etc. Yeah,
things like that. Yeah. So wait a minute. So there's no gravity in space. Like on the ISS, they float around. Planets have gravity. Space stations don't have gravity. So in a space settlement or a space colony, which that's the same thing, right? Space colony, space settlement, same thing, right?
Yeah, let's say so.
Yeah. So on a space colony or a space settlement, there's no gravity, or is there?
Well, there would be. I mean, in a long-term settlement. So a lot of people probably are aware of this cool trick you can do on Earth, where if you grab like a plastic bag, and swing it around your head a bunch, none of the stuff's going to fall out, right? Okay. Everyone's done it as a kid. Well, it turns out that also works on a massive scale. So if you take a bag that's, several miles big, and you start swinging it around, well, it turns out that things still stick to the bottom of the bag. And so you can actually produce an artificial gravity using this effect. If you've ever watched a movie where there's a spaceship and it has a big spinning ring.
Like in The Martian.
Right. What's happening there is that ring's spinning fast enough to force the things that are in it to the quote-unquote ground, the outside
stick to the
of
bottom,
ring.
yeah.
Exactly. And that produces a gravitational effect. And pretty much everyone who's ever talked about or designed a space settlement agrees that that's probably the best way for a long-term settlement to exist. Because without gravity, you end up, with lots and lots and lots of problems with bone degeneration, muscle atrophy, as well as all the horrible things that could happen with, pregnant women and in utero issues that we have no idea about yet.
Right. So we keep mentioning The Martian, and, I saw The Martian recently as well, and I saw it with some friends and family, and the people I saw it with were totally in agreement that space is terrifying and space is awful. Why would anybody ever want to go there? There's no fast food and there's no Uber and there's, all these terrible things that can kill you constantly. So why would anybody want to live in space? Why would you want to settle space?
For a lot of reasons. I mean, they're not wrong. Let's get that out of the way. There definitely is a lot of things out in space that wants to kill you. That's not inaccurate at all.
Way to sell it, William.
I know, right? Let me just get that out of the way real quick. Don't go. But no, for serious here, there's a lot of really amazing things that exist in space that we can use for our society and for the betterment of mankind. I touched upon this when I was mentioning some of the benefits of freestanding settlements, but some of them are good on Mars too. For example, you've got the ability to build large space devices. Let's say that as a broad term, such as solar panels that would allow you to provide vast amounts of energy to Earth for nothing, basically, forever. Which, if we did that tomorrow, that immediately solves the energy crisis that we're dealing with right now. You have vast quantities of natural resources in the asteroid belts, which contain any mineral you want to name on Earth, but in much larger quantities and much easier to mine, too. And they're just sitting there, just waiting for us.
So space settlements can provide resources to improve life on Earth. Mm-hmm. So this is why you want to go into space, right? Because what you're saying is there are like resources, steel or whatever, gold, platinum, things of that nature that can improve life on Earth. And then there's also the ability to manufacture solar power plants that transmit energy back down to Earth, carbon-free, totally renewable, on all the time.
Well, you're going to have a hard time mining steel out of asteroids, but basically, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, okay, so a big part of why I want to go into space is because I think that humanity needs to expand beyond this planet. One thing that often comes up is this doomsday scenario, in that Earth is often said is to have all of our eggs in one basket, and we actually live in a big... in a large space where someone keeps throwing rocks at all of the baskets that are around us, and one day someone's going to hurl a rock at our basket, and well, we're not going to have any eggs left.
Ooh,
yeah. So that's also a really good reason, one that I'm a little bit more invested in than the whole, solving all the problems solution.
Right. I honestly planetary protection.
Right, exactly.
Species protection.
That's
if
exactly.
The dinosaur, what does Neil deGrasse Tyson say? If the dinosaurs had a space program, they'd still be around, right?
Exactly.
It's kind of corny, but I think there's an element of truth to that.
Oh, for sure.
Great. So that answers my question. Why does anybody want to live in space? To protect the species, to generate power, to solve the energy crisis, and to provide more resources for humanity. Plus, the original meaning of the space station, I'm going to go ahead, the space program, to explore, to expand, to know new things, to try new things, Yeah,
the scientific benefits of a space settlement are so numerous, I couldn't even begin to get into it if I spent the next 20 minutes talking about it. I mean, the experiments that you could do alone, just less basic... find out fun, interesting physics questions and the answers to questions that we just aren't able to approach yet. Research on radiation and its effects on various different, things. It's endless.
So could a space settlement in orbit around the Earth make it easier? Could we still go to Mars? Could we still have a man on Mars? Or could we still send a probe to Europa and do all those things?
Of course. I mean, it would make it easier to do so. I mean, let's say we're talking about the perfect situation where there is a self-sustaining settlement that is able to manufacture and produce things in orbit. Well, great. Now you can build a spaceship and send some of those guys off to Mars or off to Europa because it's way, way, way easier than launching from Earth. You don't got to worry about 90% of the problems that you have from launching from Earth. I mean, right now when we launch from Earth, you got to deal with gravity, which takes up... something ridiculous, like 80% of the fuel that you launch with is spent just getting out of the atmosphere. So you can build spaceships a lot smaller and a lot cheaper with a lot less fuel. Great, that's thing one. Thing two, you got to worry about weather. That's not a problem if you're living in space. You make the weather, you control it, so, fix that. I mean, you got cosmic storms and radiation problems, but again, that's not as big of a deal as, if
A
there's,
hurricane.
forget hurricanes, if there's too much cloud cover in Cape Canaveral, they couldn't launch the shuttle, so,
Oh.
yeah, stuff like that is just, like, it's monumental for how often we could launch in that case. And then finally, you've got the fact that launch windows exists for Earth. I mean, when you're launching from one or two different locations on Earth, you have to take into consideration the angle the Earth's facing, the position of the Earth in the solar system, how far around the sun we are, how close the other planets are. And a lot of these things you do have to take into consideration if you're launching from orbit, of course, but not as many. And so your window of launches grows wider and wider and wider because, again, it's a lot easier. It just is.
Cool. So, okay, I've often been intrigued about the idea of creating one's own weather. And the way I understand a space colony or space settlement is, I like to think of the far future space settlement where it's this enormous structure where people are living inside this big sort of structure that has its own weather inside.
Mm-hmm.
And the people living in there, the cities of people, the thousands and thousands of people living inside this thing, could choose their own weather. They could vote. They could say, okay, next week we want it to be sunny. Next week we want it to rain. I mean, I don't think that's crazy. I mean, tell me if I am crazy or if I'm wrong. But that leads me to my next question, which is what would life be like? Like, okay, let's say, Elon Musk or some billionaire says, all right, we're gonna build one of these things. What would it be like once people arrive there?
Well, I mean, that is kind of the point of this whole podcast, right? To define what that is. I mean, if we take what everyone has said on this show so far, the answer is pretty much like Earth as far as it goes. I mean, there's some unique challenges that people in space face and some unique situations that mean that their government, their politics, their art, their culture is probably going to be quite different from ours. But the day-to-day life of someone on a space station is probably going to be pretty similar. It's kind of interesting. It's sort of like how on the ISS, you imagine astronauts doing incredible, mysterious things that you couldn't possibly approach. But in their downtime, they're pretty much doing the same sort of stuff we do in our downtime. Watching TV, writing songs and making music and doing all sorts of that sort of thing. And then when they're not in their downtime, they're doing their jobs, research, testing, doing and looking at results and that sort of thing.
So, is it possible within our lifetimes, or is it possible at all that someday there will be a space settlement where you could get Instacart and Grubhub and Uber and have just a normal life, walking around, hanging out, going to the bar, going to work, going to church, going to school, whatever, doing whatever people do on this planet, just like in space? With the caveat of their culture and their government might be different, but pretty much.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'd like to say yes. I always would like to say yes. I mean, I wouldn't be doing all this if I didn't think somewhere in me that the answer to that question is definitely. Realistically, there's a lot in the way of a space settlement like that. A lot. There's a lot of barriers and roadblocks. Not all of them are things that we can necessarily control. A lot of them are political, financial, social, and a lot of them have so many different root causes that changing them is, well, it's going to be difficult. It's a hard path. I think it's possible. I think that it truly is an accomplishable task. Not an Island 3, which for our listeners was sort of the end goal, the end stage of space settlement, a large thing with tens of thousands of people living upon it, with, vast spaces of land and incredibly Earth-like environments to live in with its own functioning ecosystem. I think that in our lifetimes we could definitely, with a little bit of work, definitely see something like, a couple hundred people living in space. I think we could certainly see something like that. I don't see any reason why not. But at the time scales that our current space program works at, and with the current public interest levels in space and the current political climate regarding space development, honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure at all if it will come down to that. Things can change. Things can change.
Sure.
But
Okay.
right now, our NASA's next goal is to send a manned mission to Mars, right?
Right.
And they're talking about doing that in 2035. So in our lifetimes, I mean, yeah,
Maybe.
we'll see.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, that's fair.
Mhm.
That's a fair answer. And so it's possible. There's nothing stopping a humongous space station from being built, and within the laws of physics. It's just perhaps the laws of economics and politics that are holding such a structure back.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple other things in place there, but yeah, effectively, if there was infinite money
Right.
and all the public will to do it, there's absolutely no reason we couldn't start tomorrow, for example.
A fair response. A fair response. Very good. Okay. But even having structures in space, on the moon, on Mars, in free space with hundreds of people, would be quite a lot of progress from where we are today, where there's, what, 9 people permanently living in space, or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 people,
Mhm.
which is a lot of progress from what it was 15 years ago when we had 0 people permanently living in space.
Right.
So, yeah, incremental, slow progress. A little too slow for my liking, for my taste,
Mm-hmm.
and probably for yours, if I may be so bold, but
Oh, yeah.
progress nonetheless. Okay, I have one more question, and it's kind of a goofy one, but I got to ask because I know a lot of people out there love, we're X-Files babies and love, thinking about aliens and UFOs. Would space settlement bring us any closer to answering the question, are we alone in the universe?
It's a good question. So one of the groups that I would really like to get on the show at some point is someone from SETI. I keep emailing them and they won't reply to me, but maybe if I keep talking about them in the show, they'll get back to me.
Mm.
I would love to get someone from SETI on here to answer that exact question. I don't mean to, I don't think that Little Green Men have visited us I don't think they built the pyramids or anything, but personally, I take the Carl Sagan approach to this sort of thing. It's preposterous to think that we're not, we don't,
Yeah,
there's not other people out there thinking these same thoughts. It's insane. But we can't find them, and that's kind of weird, and there's a lot of questions that get raised by that. Now, would space settlement make it easier to answer that question? I can't see why not. You'd be able to build telescopes and listening satellites a lot easier than on Earth. Right now, SETI's sort of stuck using whatever large listening devices we have on the planet, and those got to deal with all kinds of interference and problems. And building them in space means you can build them bigger, means you can build them cheaper in a lot of cases. It'll mean it'll be easier to send probes out, and so you know how right now it's kind of cool to build those balloons that go up into the atmosphere and take a bunch of pictures and then fall down?
right.
Well, space settlement, I can't see a reason why that sending probes to Alpha Centauri wouldn't be the same sort of thing, you know?
Right.
Once you break it down, there's not really all that much fuel required. It's not really that complicated. Once you get rid of a lot of the issues on Earth, and it wouldn't be a problem. I foresee like people building kits and selling that sort of thing on space
That'd be
space
awesome.
settlements.
Yeah.
Alpha Centauri rockets, and it
Yeah.
would just litter the galaxy with nonsense. But I don't see why not. And maybe some of the people from SETI can come and correct me on that. Please come on the show. But I don't see a reason why it wouldn't help us have a couple more ears up there in space.
Great. Great. That's cool.
One of the main things about finding life on other planets and finding life in other solar systems is that it would ask a lot of questions about who we are as a people, right? It would ask a lot of questions about what we think of as ourselves. Right now we're still on a Copernican model, really, when you get down to it on a societal level. We still think we're the center of everything. We're the only things around. And that comes across a lot in our society. It would be interesting to see how our society thinks when Earth isn't the only human world. Even if it's just a settlement with a couple hundred people that is self-sustaining up in the asteroid belt or something.
Mm.
This is a subject we talked about a little bit with David Valentine, one of the earlier episodes. But the effects on Earth of what people would think about themselves and the slow changes in society that would come about from knowing that we're not the center of the universe anymore. There's actually another group of us about 10 feet that way. It's interesting. I'd be interested to see what the effects on society would be after that.
Yeah. What occurs to me, I can't help but be the devil's advocate again, or if we look for 1,000 years and don't find anything. I think that raises even bigger questions.
Well, indeed. I mean,
if we are littering the local galactic neighborhood with probes and, sending out all these, looking at telescopes at everything and don't find anything, don't hear anything, golly, that would be weird. Unlikely. I agree with you. I think it would be unlikely.
But it's certainly a possibility. I mean, there's a lot of people out there asking the question of why we haven't found anyone yet, and it's a valid question. There's no guarantee that we would find something out there. It would definitely ask a lot of questions. Great.
Well, Liam, thank you for spending the time. Those are all of my questions. Is there anything else that I haven't covered or any questions I haven't asked that you want to expound upon?
I mean, we could talk about space settlement all day long, I'm sure, you and I. It would not be hard at all. A couple of the things that I wanted to say before we end this is one of the major reasons for space settlement that I'm passionate about it and that I want to share this with the world through this podcast and through the other things that I do, trying to get it into the hands of the average public out there, is that I think space settlement is very, very, very cool. I don't mean to be flippant about that.
Me too.
We just spend a lot of time talking about the very hard, very serious, this is the reasons that humanity must explore and expand into the galaxy. And we justify that a lot with all of these purposes. And that's important. It's important to talk about the practicalities and realities behind space settlement and why it's important. And all of the things that I've said today are true, and at least in so much as I believe in them. But I think it's very, very easy for us to not also mention that it's okay to think that it's just really, really neat and a really cool thing that we should be doing. Let's not forget that the first people building rockets way, way back did it because they thought it would be interesting. They weren't designing rockets thinking that they can, blow up the Germans or send people to the moon. The very first rockets were just, I'm going to put a bunch of this explosive stuff in a tube and see what happens. Right. And when you had people talking about...
It was a hobby.
Exactly. When you had people talk about going to the moon, that boiled down to people saying, it would be really neat to go to the moon. The moon looks pretty cool. Let's go there.
Right.
So I don't think there's a problem with having that attitude toward space settlement. And I wanted to make that clear that my main motivation behind telling all of you folks about space settlement is because I think it's really cool. I think about it all the time, and I want everyone else to think about it all the time.
Hear, hear. Well, thanks again, Liam. I think that's wonderful, and I agree with you. I, too, think it's awesome, and I just really enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this was a good idea. It's easy to lose sight of the kind of people that we're trying to reach out to with this show sometimes, and I think it's nice to come back here and have a little session where we just pull it all together a little bit, and this goes out to you listeners too. It's really nice having you all around here, and I hope this cleared up a couple things. If there's any other questions that you guys have about space settlement or things you want us to clear up, I wouldn't mind doing short 10-minute episodes once in a while where we just answer some questions. I'm sure Tom would be down for that too.
Absolutely.
I think that would be a really interesting addition to the show. Maybe it can be added to the Patreon or something where we just do it regularly, depending on, if we get a couple more donations and that sort of thing. I think that would be a really neat way to get to connect with you guys, because I'm sure you all have a lot of questions about the topics that we raise and space settlement as a whole. I know I do. Whenever we finish up with guests, my first instinct is, boy, I really hope I get to talk to that guy again, because that was a lot of really interesting stuff that we just talked about.
You got it.
Well, thanks a lot, Tom.
You got it. My pleasure. It's been great, and looking forward to the next time we can do it.
If you have any comments or suggestions for the show, please email me at voicesfroml5@gmail.com or leave a comment. Music for Voices from L5 has been graciously provided by John Boswell of Symphony of Science. Find more of his work at www.symphonyofscience.com. Hey, if you like what we do here and you want to hear more experts from all sorts of fields talking about space settlement in ways that you might not hear anywhere else, consider donating to our Patreon account. We really rely on donations to keep the show going, and even a small donation helps us get better guests, better equipment, and produce a better show for you. We have some great goals in mind for the show, and we'd really like you to make something special. You can check out a link to our Patreon account on the website, or in the comments, all links that accompany this show. Thanks.